All right, we're making it happen. We brought all the way from Brisbane, Australia, Travis Hunt. How are you?
Really good.
Suddenly, you're listening to the podcast on the other side of the world, different continent, and now you're in the podcast.
Yeah, crazy. I really crazy.
This is great. And I kind of tricked you into this because you were like, I wanted to connect. You said you were coming to the U.S. We've been emailing like, hey, we should connect. And then I was like, well, while you're here, we might as well get you in front of a microphone.
Yeah.
And you said that sort of relates to when you were called as bishop.
Yeah.
Tell us that story.
It just had exactly the same feeling because, Shell and I, my wife and I,
and she's off camera here.
Yeah, Shell's here. We just moved into a new ward, and in my previous ward, I'd served as a bishop, as a counselor in the bishopric, and we thought, that's when you move out of the ward, that's how you get out of the calling, right? and so we thought we were very safe. The bishop was there, and he didn't. There's no real reason why we would have expected for him to be released, I guess, despite the fact that he'd been there a while. But the stake president said, "Hey, can I catch up with you and your wife?" And I know this guy. I grew up with him. He's one of my best friend's dads, and so we just went in and we thought, he's so nice. Like, why does he just wants to catch up with us, see how we're going.
What a minister.
What a nice stake president. And so we were just completely caught off guard, and we were just chatting, and it was almost like he didn't really warm us into it either. He's just like, we're chatting. Also, we'd like to ask you to serve as the Bishop of Kuala. What?
You're like, come again? What?
Yeah. And I just remember, sort of being a bit jaw dropped, like, speechless, and Rochelle just started laughing. She's just sitting next to me laughing, and he's like, no, I'm serious. I'm like, we had to just clarify with him. Are you just, because we know him well, and so I thought, no, this could be a pretty sick joke, but sure enough. Anyway, I guess I felt nice. Similar when you were like, because we were just like, oh yeah, we should catch up. Yeah, we should have a chat. Yeah. Oh yeah. And also, do you mind if we record an episode of Leading?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, sure. Right.
Well, and we're always striving to get, more international voices on Leading Saints. And if we can do it in person, even better, though I need more and more excuse to travel in Australia. So if you can line me up with some other potential guests, then I can get myself to your beautiful country. Right?
I'm sure I could.
That's awesome. So maybe just give us the lay of the land of maybe generally what the church is like in Brisbane. You got a temple there for a while, right?
We do, yeah.
When was that built?
About 2002.
See, you're getting all sorts of questions.
Yeah.
I think it was part of like the surge of temples around President Hinckley's time, right?
It was, yeah. Australia just got, a couple of the kind of all the same temples. You get that box, you get that box, you get that box. All the same, you get them all. But
nice.
Some of the main cities, got That's temples.
Great. So tell us, what's the church like in 2024 in Brisbane?
I mean, it's I'm here in Utah with you now, and I was actually surprised how similar it is. It's we visited a ward here in South Salt Lake, and it was very clear to me some of the same kind of struggles that we experience over there are being experienced here. And
what would you say some of those struggles would be, like generally speaking?
Well, I mean, it's winter here, and we went to the 9:30 ward, and apparently that's early. That's like an early.
so people trickle in.
Yeah. So I mean, we were like 5 or 10 minutes early, and there's just no one there. We're like, is this on? Like, but sure enough, similar to Australia, as it gets closer to the starting time, people trickle in.
Yeah.
But I mean, our kind of perception of Salt Lake and Utah is like, just members coming out the rafters, just thousands of members everywhere. And, that just wasn't. And, to the point where like my two boys were asked to pass the sacrament because they didn't have, enough young men, which is something that we deal with all the time in Australia, but you don't expect to deal with it here. So, I mean, apart from that, we have the same sorts of things: faith crises, faith transitions. I think in some ways, people in the church in Australia can be more orthodox even than members here. Especially those that, joined the church, perhaps my parents' generation. There was lots of rules that we were brought up with, and if you were brought up in the church, and I think it's this generation that's sort of pushing back on some of those rules.
Yeah. So maybe give us how would you describe your ward during the time you served those 7.5 years as bishop?
Yeah, so my ward was called Capalba Ward. It's actually been absorbed to two different wards now, but it was a small ward, and we didn't mind that. I think everybody in the ward appreciated that it was small, but it had a very family feel.
How many did you get on a typical Sunday? Do you remember?
Pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Pre-COVID, yeah.
Yeah, pre-COVID is probably 160 or something.
Okay.
Post-COVID was more like 120 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
So yeah, small ward. But we over the course of, I was serving for 7.5 years. So I mean, we really tried to have a family feel, have a warm feel, and inviting feel, so that when each of the members of the ward came, they felt great about coming. And when guests, visitors were in town, it was often, and I'd take pride in this, but they would come to you after they'd visited the ward, and they'd be like, whatever's happening here is a good thing, because we don't have this experience every time we visit a different ward. So we tried to make it super warm, super welcoming, and super friendly.
Nice. And we'll get into some of that, as hopefully crack the code on how you did that, right? Lots of youth, would you say? I mean, as the bishop, obviously that's a focus, but was it a lot of youth in the ward?
Yeah, again, I would have thought probably not by Utah standards, let's say.
Sure.
But I mean, we had probably 20 to 30 youth, 10 young men, 10 young women that were kind of, and then that would fluctuate. So sometimes there was less and sometimes there was more.
Nice. Anything else as far as the general structure of your ward, or uniqueness or characteristic? Or did we give a good idea there?
No, I think other than that, it was a pretty standard ward. You
Yeah.
have sort of a mix of demographics, mix of age groups, some return missionaries, some, lots of strong sisters. I think it was pretty.
Because, I mean, Brisbane is a huge city relatively to, one of the top 5 cities, I guess, in Australia, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have you just have some stability there with just having numbers of people, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, our building has 3 wards that meet in it. So, and that's pretty rare for Brisbane. There's not many buildings that have, more than 1 ward, but, certainly 3 wards is our building was our stake center. So, there's in the surrounding area, there's, quite a good kind of allocation of church leadership, former stake presidents, former bishops, former Relief Society presidents, stake Relief Society presidents.
Yeah. How long would you say it would take to drive from one side of the ward to the other?
Half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's doable, right?
It's not too bad. It's not like,
again, it's not Utah, but it's.
Yeah, but it's not, I don't have one of those stories where I drive 3 hours to visit, so-and-so. No.
Plan out my whole day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's jump into, as we do in these How I Lead interviews, I ask you to maybe think about certain principles that served you well during your time of leadership, not because you figured it out, but like you said, you felt like the ward developed into a very welcoming ward and felt like a family. And I'm sure there's a percentage of the ward who's watching this and being like, no way, like he did everything wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But nonetheless, that was your attempt, and there were some indicators that was happening. And so the first principle you have here is what you bring, you will eventually see in the ward. Unpack that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, I think when I was first called, I remember going into ward councils in the early days, really just so green and not really understanding what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. But, just feeling a sense of like seriousness, a sense of kind of over solemnity in ward councils and that sort of thing. And that's just not my personality. So I like to be in a ward council, and I want to, if we could be there for an hour, we may as well have some fun as well. Like, we're going to talk about all the stuff, but let's have some laughs and, let's have a good time. And so over the months and the years that I served, we would come up with various focus points and that sort of thing. And I just think that without overemphasizing the impact of a bishop, because there's so many working parts to a ward, but if you are pumped about, this certain thing and you exuberate that energy, everybody in the room is going to start to feel that. If you kind of repeat yourself on how you feel about that and the energy is there, and you don't have to be like a rah-rah kind of person, but the Relief Society president's going to pick that up. your bishopric counselors are going to pick that up. The elders quorum presidents, everyone's going to pick that up, and they're going to go into the ward with that same energy regarding that topic or that focus point. And, that's going to come through in talks. It's going to come through in conversations in the hallway. And so, little by little, I feel like those sort of things would trickle down to the entire ward, to the point where, you would meet with random ward members in the hallway and they would say things that you said in ward council. And I think, I guess, so point being that you really, as the bishop, have to show up with that energy around the things that you think are important, your vision.
Yeah. And so was it a matter of just like walking those meetings and just making sure your real personality comes through, or how did you like start that momentum happening so it spills over to the other experiences in the ward?
Well, I guess it's a bit like, we're having a podcast right now, and we met for a meal beforehand. It's like this warm-up kind of thing that you have to do. You can't just rock up to a ward council and be like, all right, let's talk about baptizing more people. So giving each person, each individual, also in the stewardship catch-ups that I would have, like when we would have those, it's not like, okay, sister so-and-so, Relief Society president, how's ministering going? It's, let's talk, let's have a laugh. Let's, develop that relationship, so that then when we would come into ward councils or those larger meetings, I hate to use a teenage word, but the vibe is already there. Like, everybody knows that it's okay to have a laugh, that we're going to have a pretty good time. This isn't going to be a drag. And, so I guess giving people their individual time, especially in those one-on-one moments, so that when you go into the larger setting, it's already warm. So, and people feel sort of free in that kind of environment, I think. I think, when you wake up, I imagine in Utah, you wake up on a Sunday morning early, you got to, depending on when you have your ward council, but you go to ward council pre-church, and it's cold, and you don't want to go, and like, and then you get there and you got a pious bishop who's just like, let us pray. Like, it's just no one wants to be there, and if they don't want to be there, they're not going to contribute. They're not going to offer up ideas because, perhaps that kind of attitude applies to reception of ideas and that sort of thing. Yeah. So it sounds like, just even beginning a meeting, you're not jumping into the agenda or even the prayer right away, right? You're letting the room breathe a little bit. You're connecting with people, and then it sounds like you're outside of that context, you're developing relationships with every member of your ward council so that they know you, you know them. You're gathering as friends and not as, well, because the handbook said we should. Yeah, absolutely. And everybody has their own personality, and I certainly don't consider myself like funny or a comedian, but I do like to laugh. And
you're Australian, so you're halfway there. Right? Yeah. They love a good laugh.
Yeah. And I think it was important for me that people understood that, so that when we came to those meetings, and I think, to be honest, when I was first called, I said, well, I'm just going to be me. I can't be anyone else, and I can't try and be Mr. Serious, like, bishop. And so I think, there was probably a couple of members of that ward council initially that were like a little put off by this, and just like, why are you making a joke of this? This is serious business. But I guess each person has their own personality, and this was just mine. And I think it was Disney who said, laughter is no enemy to learning. And essentially a ward council or a bishopric meeting is just a learning. It's just a learning environment, really. We call it revelation, we call it whatever we want, but you're trying to learn about each other. You're trying to learn about a ward. You're trying to learn about a focus point. And when you have a good time along the way, it comes easier, to be honest. I actually find it, like the effectiveness with any meeting was always commensurate with how many times we laughed during the meeting. If it was quiet and solemn, overly solemn, there's a time and a place to be solemn, but we wouldn't get anything done. Nothing good would come from it, and people would leave going, that sucked.
Yeah. And I appreciate like just this principle of what you bring, you will eventually see in the ward, like just giving permission for your type of leadership, or those that you call, their personality, allow that to, filter out into the culture of the ward, that if you're fun people, it's okay if the ward's fun, right? And maybe there is that bishop who's more solemn And yeah, maybe the ward will need that for a few years of maybe going that way, but just giving yourself permission to letting your personality spill over into your leadership and into the organization.
Yeah, 100%. My wife grew up Baptist, and she was telling me about just earlier today about her like every so often you would get a pastor change, and it's a paid occupation, obviously, but it's sort of similar. Pastor is kind of like a bishop, but when you get a new pastor, that new pastor might have a completely different personality and a completely different vision, and sometimes that would be well received, sometimes that wouldn't. But eventually people kind of come around to it, and you can't try and be what you're not. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly allowing your own true personality to come out, and some people are a bit more serious, and that's cool too. And some people, like us, we wanted to have a good time while we're there. Not there for a long time. There for So,
and I appreciate that, the Disney quote, that, and even altering that laughter is no enemy to revelation. You can have a good time and have a very high revelatory experience. And in our culture, I see this often where, we sort of overcorrect into that pious, like you said, there's a time and a place, but sometimes it's like you can only receive revelation when we're all whispering, or like we listen to that very quiet hymn, and now we're reverent like we are in primary, where it's like, no, God's called us to these roles, and here we go.
Yeah. And I think we take, scriptures around, what's the scripture about not being light-minded, and
I'm sure I know it somewhere,
right? Avoiding
it's flashing
those,
on the screen
those sorts
right
of
now.
things. But I think we, sometimes we can take that a little too literally. You laughed, Now we can't have the Spirit. No, come on. I mean, as one of my favorite proverbs actually is that Proverbs 17:22. It says, "A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones." And I think the more intimate the situation as well, the more that you can get a good feel for that. So, at a ward council level, we have some laughs, but there's probably some boundaries that you don't want to go crazy. But then, in a bishopric, you're even more intimate. So, there's 3 or 4 people, 5 people with your exec sec and your clerk. And, you get to know each other very well, and, how far you can go within, and still, have a good time. But, then with that intimacy and that ability to be who you are, and for your counselors to be who they are, I think it allows the Spirit to be more free-flowing and not be restrained by, a bishop wants me to show up this certain kind of way. No, show up how you are. And and I appreciate. I remember, serving as a bishop, we were in this inner city ward. We were all in our 20s in the bishopric, right? And so, and I remember there were times where, as the bishop, I sort of had to correct the other way, where it seemed like we were trying to, who could say the funniest one-liner at every step of the way, and and there were moments where I had to kind of say, hey, let's regroup here, like let's stay focused and let's have fun, but we don't need to turn this into just a laughing stock, right? So again, there's a balance, but I think the main point is clear. So anything else with that first principle that we haven't touched on? Or? No, not really. I mean, when I had the good fortune of, I think I was younger than I was the youngest all the time. When all of my counselors all the time were always older than me. So, and I usually would have one that was a reasonable amount older. So, there was always that personality about, never let anything get out of hand. But yeah,
good balance. All right, the second principle is kindness. I like this.
You like kindness?
Yeah, I think everybody does. Everybody should be kind, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess all these principles, they're just ideas without a vision. But I think part of our vision for the ward, and I think for Rochelle and I, as Rochelle, as kind of leading the ward, was that the ward would be a warm place, that it would be a safe place, that it would be a safe haven emotionally, spiritually, physically, intellectually, and so that when people come into the ward, they feel that whatever their values are, whatever their persuasions are, whatever their situation is, that they're welcome, that we're so happy to have them with us. That was kind of, all these little principles kind of come off of that idea. And so kindness is just like, of course. I love the idea that, each of us we like to say we're created in the image of God. And that's sort of one of the unique things about our theology. You know, we have two eyes, we have two arms, but I think it was S. Michael Wilcox, I think, that taught that, you know, it's not just that we're created in the image of God physically, we're created in the image of God emotionally, spiritually. All of the kind of beautiful characteristics of God that we know, forgiveness, that he is, you know, loving, merciful, charitable, those are in us too. And one of those obviously is kindness, you know, which we attribute to God. And so like when we work with God, he can bring that out in spades with other people. And so, yeah, I mean, as a leader, I think that can manifest in so many different ways. It might be just simply, you know, sitting with people in the hallway or in the office and, you know, being with them in their pain, and not just barking, this is what you need to do at them, but just being empathetically being with them in their pain.
I think most leaders really desire that, you know, they want to create that. And sometimes they're like, I don't really know how, but I think the passive aggressive battle that happens is often that the administrative drum of things, right? It's like, all right, sacrament's over. Let's get to the second hours. Or do we have teachers, right? And in a bishopric, you're sort of obsessing about these things at times. And, you know, well, there's no teacher, we got to scramble, or, you know, this person didn't show up, or, you know, whatever it is that sort of has this gravitational pull. And I remember I call it my Bishop Smiley principle with my counselors. I'd say, I want to be Bishop Smiley, that I'm not rushing to make sure the primary's functioning as it should, you know, let's make sure people do that. But for me, I want to be the type of guy that sits down at the pew with someone and takes a few minutes as if I have nowhere else to be but with them, right? And I think that's what you're articulating.
Yeah, and ideally, you know, as long as you said, you articulated that to your counselors. So when the people you're serving with know that and you articulate it like you did, they can kind of cover that base. So when you do need to sit down with that person, and they can see that, your exec sec, your counselors can see that. And they can, you know, obviously recognize it and pick up the slack and move those more administrative things along. Yeah. So that's, certainly having that. But yeah, I think when I was serving, you know, I think especially in the early days of serving, I remember having so many people come into the office and they would be like, telling me how church makes them anxious, and church, like their anxiety peaks on Sundays. And I really I understood why, but I also hated, I hated not them obviously, but I hated that had to be the case.
Yeah, it shouldn't be the case. Yeah. You'd hope that there'd be hope and
and it should be. Right? And so I guess it really prompted me to kind of really try and make the ward a place where you could come easily. You know, it wasn't a challenge to come. You know, you could walk into the doors and you knew that there was somebody, people there that were, I guess, worthy to hold you in however you show up. We use the words worthy a lot, you know, and I personally don't really like that, but I like the reverse of it, when we can be worthy to, worthy of people's stories, worthy of people's vulnerabilities, you know, worthy of people's truth, worthy of people's difference, you know, worthy of people's lack of testimony, so that when they come, they know I can trust this person. I don't have to be perfect. My hair can be a bit of a mess today, I can be doubting everything there is about the gospel, and I can still show up and you know, have people that aren't going to be like, well, you just need to you know, pray more. Do the right thing more. Yeah. What are you doing wrong?
Yeah. I love that framing of, so often we talk about worthiness as, am I worthy to go to church? But to flip that on its head, is church a place that's worthy to receive me and to receive everybody? And that's what it really should be, because then they'll find that worthiness going both ways as we create that community, right?
Yeah. And I guess that was, you know, as a bishop, you're trying to promote in yourself, obviously, and in the leadership group especially, but then amongst everybody in the ward, this idea that, you know, be ready when you come on a Sunday, because it's not about, you're not coming to church for you. You know, sometimes people say, why do I even have to go to church? Well, you don't really, not for you. You come for other people. And so make yourself, you know, equip yourself, be in a place that, you know, be prepared every Sunday that you could be a very special person to somebody, on that day.
Yeah. So take me just into like, let's just talk about sacrament meeting. Like for the leaders listening, like the bishopric members thinking, I would love to do that. What does that even look like? I mean, were there components? Were there specific callings? Did people stand certain places? I mean, what led into that? Or is it more natural or organic?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say, you know, I
Here's
implemented
the 5-point plan. Come on.
I implemented these 5 callings, and they, you know, like, not really. I mean, and in fairness, this whole vibe, in as much as we had any success, is not like, oh, you know, Travis and Shell. It's not down to me as a bishop. It's, you know, there was multiple people that invested in these ideas. Ward council to you know, the elderly people in the ward that. You know, that still message me to this. I told you our ward is no longer, but they still message me to this day, you know, saying, I wish our ward was still a thing, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so these other people invested in the same ideas, but I guess, you know, it goes back to that first point that what you show up with will filter down, you know. So you only get a certain amount of touch points with the members of the ward, you know. When you're giving talks, you know, when you've got a lot of members, you can't talk to them all every Sunday or even every week. And so when you do, that's prime time. And you really got to make sure that what you feel to be important or whatever your vision is very clear. And there's no mistakes. not in a authoritative kind of like, this is the way, but just, you know, if you want your ward to be warm and you know, there's principles behind that and there's theology behind that you need to articulate that to the ward council so they can further on. But also, you know, when you're talking from the stand, and you know, they will start to grasp that. There was things that we said in our ward. You know, one of the next things that I was going to talk about, but that became buzzwords. You know, and everybody in the ward would start to repeat them, and you know, I'd have people messaging me saying, "Oh, I did." You know, some of these things that we implemented. And so I guess, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but certainly there was no specific callings. But when you get the chance, you need to articulate the vision, and that needs to be clear. Yeah. I'm still surprised. Like you talk about vision in the podcast a lot, and I gather that you find it's, you know, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think everybody understands that in theory, but I'm surprised when I see, I guess, leadership not making their vision very, very clear. Like that's the first thing. And it's not like some sort of billboard ad or some stupid catchphrase or something, but they have to know what you want for the ward or for the stake or whatever it is that your elders quorum or your relief society. What do you want? What kind of relief society do you want this to be? What's the vibe? They need to understand what you want. They may not agree that that's the best thing, but they need to understand that what you are envisioning for you.
At least they know where you stand as the leader, right? Yeah. Whether they are 100% on board quite yet or not, they know where Bishop Hunt is coming from, right? And what he's desiring. And it's one of those things like, and I appreciate how you're saying you have to be so clear and articulate it, right? And that's maybe easier said than done, but it's almost a part of that is also articulating what we're not doing, right? So to create a warm feeling, you may have to tell your ward council, we're not worried about Sunday school starting on time, you know, or we're not worried about it ending on time or what, and not saying that that's what you did or anything, but suddenly people are grasping like, oh, okay, so I don't need to rush off. Or I remember one of my infamous moments of being a bishop. This is during home teaching time. We were in a very transient ward, and in ward council, I strongly articulated the message of I could not care less about home teaching. We're not even thinking about it. And for an elders quorum and a relief society president to hear that, they're like, well, then what do we do? Like, I will tell you what we do. Because I was more concerned about all the names on the list that we didn't know. Were they there? Did they move? We got to go find them and figure out who these people are. And then maybe down the road, we can worry about home teaching. So it's articulated so strongly being like, and we're doing this, not these things for now, right? Because that's the vision. And then people are like, well, now I know where to go. Now I know what to do, right? So.
Yeah. And I to be honest, I think I might have got this idea from you years ago.
Oh, let's pretend like you did.
But I mean, it just reminded me of, you know, earlier in the time of serving as a bishop, when I said to the ward council, like, if you're not, you know, every bishop struggles with those moments where like, you want to have ward council, you want to have an effective ward council, and you want people to bring stuff to the agenda, and they don't. And And so I think, I don't know if this rings bells for you, but I just told them, if you don't have anything with the agenda, we're just not going to do World Council. I'm not going to, we're not going to, it's not like, have it every week or every fortnight, whatever you do. But if you're not going to participate, if you have nothing from the Elders Quorum, if you have nothing from the least side to actually talk about, why would we gather? We're not going to do it. But we, with that, we also said, but of course,
we'd love to have something to talk about, right?
But of course, and I know, I trust you guys. I love you guys, and I trust you as the Elders Quorum president. I know you love all the people in the Elders Quorum. I know you're working with them hard, so it's very unlikely that you won't have stuff. But if you don't, we're not having it. So I guess just being super as authentic as you can be as with people as well, not just I don't know, just the attitude of being very clear, like you just said, about why you would or wouldn't have it. And there's obviously more to that conversation. It's not just like, hey, guess what, we don't have to have a ward council.
Because we have nothing to talk about.
And it never worked like that. I remember even telling the ward that I had told the ward council, we're not having ward council, from a talk. And it never happened, it never was like, sweet, cool, I'm a ward council. Everybody was like, okay, yeah, no, if I have to, love my quorum, I have to love my group, whoever I'm leading, I'm going to actually bring stuff to talk about.
And because I think generally the status quo is like ward council is the bishoprics meeting, and they'll bring the agenda. They'll tell us what we need to talk about. And if I may have an item here or there, I'll bring it up. And so I just love that enabling of no, this is our meeting. And so you're bringing stuff to the agenda as well as we are. But if there's nothing to talk about, one less meeting, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. I love that you bring up this word, because I've read about this word. There's a lot of research around this word, and it's propinquity. Yeah. Is this used more often in Australia than the US, or is this?
I don't know. I'd never heard of it before hearing.
So teach us what propinquity is.
Well, according to the dictionary, propinquity is the tendency of individuals to form close relationships with people they repeatedly encounter.
Almost like a ward. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's not something I obviously came up with, but so I think this idea came from Kevin J. Worthen, or that's who I got it from. I don't know who he got it from.
Yeah, and well, I know the Influencer book, which is written by a bunch of Latter-day Saints, and they're BYU grads and whatnot. They've done a lot of research about influence and motivating people using this concept of propinquity. So this has sort of been debunked, but the open office concept a few years ago, that sort of people did that with this. Well, if we can get people intermingling more, then more ideas and innovation will come out. But I think more research in that context, so it didn't really work like that. But the science is that as we associate with each other, things happen. Right?
Yeah. And I know there's science behind it, but for me, it's just like, duh. Like,
right. It's one of those research. Yeah, of course.
That's not science. That's like, of course. But I guess, we I guess in a sense use this propinquity idea as kind of like a marketing buzzword kind of vibe thing, but because it's just rolls off the tongue and becomes something that people can really just latch on to easily. But I guess the idea is that we wanted the ward to be together as frequently as possible, especially I was a bishop over the period of COVID, and so we obviously had our downtime, and so especially post COVID, we really wanted to get back in physical contact, physical connection, and not because we all needed to be best friends and best buddies, but as we know, one of the beautiful things about our church is that you are with people that disagree with you, but this is all good. Like, this is all part of the growth process for each of us as members. But certainly we were trying to draw the people together, and as Kevin J. Worthen says, nothing propinks like propinquity. And so so we would just try and get together as frequently as possible. And we didn't shy away from the idea that you may not like everybody here, but we are a ward family. There's no getting around that. And so, one of the beautiful things one of my best lessons, I guess, from serving as a bishop was that when I started serving, I would look at people that I perhaps found annoying and go, it's pretty annoying, and that's it.
I'm glad you're human. This is good. Yeah. Very relatable.
Yeah, exactly. But, you can't do that as a bishop. You can't do that and be effective as a bishop anyway. If someone comes into the bishop's office, wants to talk and tell you about some stuff, and you just go, man, this person's so annoying, you're not going to help them. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the biggest blessings was looking past that. And I loved the opportunity to have somebody come in and be someone that perhaps I don't naturally kind of connect with, or I'm not going to ideally go and hang out with, but to set a challenge for myself, find the divine in this person in front of me. Find what makes them beautiful. Find what makes them special. Find what makes them likable. Because and the reality is I never met somebody, there was not a person in our ward that I gave that space to or tried that with that I couldn't find it. I always found it. I always found not just what was divine, because we're all sons and daughters of God, but I always found what was likable about them. Why would people and even love this person? I always found it. When you go into any interaction with somebody with that mindset, it's amazing how you can connect with anybody. And I guess we would try and encourage that same kind of mentality in the ward members. So then when we brought about this idea of propinquity, so we're going to get together a lot, but don't get together and be like, great, I've got to hang out with, Sister Smith again. She's so annoying. Get together and you have a challenge. We all have a challenge. Find what's beautiful about Sister Smith. And, and I think to an extent the ward did that. And, when that happened, that warmth, that caring environment just naturally was a result.
Yeah, I appreciate this term and how you bring it up, because I'm, living in Utah, even Utah County, I walk out my house and I can see the bishop's house, the elders quorum president's house, right? Where, outside of Utah, especially outside the U.S., you could probably go Sunday to Sunday and not see a member of your ward. And really Sunday's the only time you really gather and whatnot. And so really leveraging these moments of gathering and then perpetuating them so that it's stimulating unity, connection. You're actually sitting with Sister Smith and learning more about her, not just rolling your eyes at her comments every week in Sunday school, right? And so it's a proactive thing.
Yeah. And that's the really rewarding part. I mean, it's when you meet someone and you're like, this guy's so cool, and you get along, you make a friend, it's great. But when you meet someone and you're like, it is that person that's saying those obnoxious things, and you're like, man, hard to love. And then you actually take that, you do that experiment, and the result is that you're like, I do see what's really great about her. That's really rewarding as a person, and as a spiritual exercise. And the beautiful thing is that it's not limited to demographics either, because obviously the ward is small, so you're not gonna always have heaps of people that are. I'm 42, so there's not going to be heaps and heaps of 42-year-olds that love the NBA and love, all the same things that I love. And so to be able to sit down on a couch with a 72-year-old woman and just shoot the breeze is and know that we care deeply for each other is a very rewarding exercise. Yeah.
And again, it brings so much purpose to religion in general, but even in our faith tradition, there's some unique parts about it that the typical person, the typical American or Australian doesn't get this throughout their typical day. They don't find themselves having to engage with somebody who's a little bit different than them. They can just retract into their silos, and it leads to a more enriched life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else about propinquity, the word of the day that we need to talk about?
No.
All right.
That's
all right. The last principle is lower the bar, increase participation. Oh boy. Where are we going here? This is good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I wanted to just throw this in, and you can edit it out if it's too offensive. Okay. But yeah, I used to say to people when we're setting goals and that sort of thing, and ward councils, and that people go, oh, let's try and get to X amount of crazy baptisms. I'm like, no, let's try and get one. I guess, and I used to say, and I don't know where I picked this up from someone, but let's make the bar so low that you can't crawl under it. Like it's impossible not to reach the goal. I don't know. Maybe I got it from you.
I'll take it.
But yeah, I mean, and I guess it's controversial because, I know that there's a lot of, I even have an audiobook by Brad Wilcox called Raising the Bar or something.
Yeah.
And I have, and I know that there's been talks over the years.
That was like the missionary Raise the Bar,
Raise the Bar,
10 or so years ago, right?
Yeah. And so we want to raise the bar, but I guess there's a couple of ways in which, or contexts in which I think, lowering the bar can be beneficial. I used to often talk, I guess one easy example that I think I wouldn't get much pushback on would be like testimony meeting. I would often get up at testimony. You get those awkward silences in testimony meeting, and sometimes people don't want to get up for various reasons, obviously. But if I always would find it troubling when people wouldn't get up because they thought they didn't have a testimony. And I would often, when it's my turn to, start the meeting off and bear my testimony, I would say, like, try and clarify with people that like every single one of us in this room has a testimony of some sort. If you are here, you couldn't be here without a testimony that God is good. Just come. You can just say that God is good. That's what I believe. That nature is a blessing. These are all, or that the word of wisdom is a great principle and it helps my life. There'd be super basic level principles, and everybody has those. And sometimes I think we make it's inadvertently, right? Culturally, we make the bar too high on simple things like that, where it's like people start to think that because of what they hear come from the pulpit, I can't go up if I don't know that the Book of Mormon's true, and that that Russell M. Nelson's a prophet, and that all of these things, these tenets that not everybody believes necessarily, not everybody in the congregation. Yeah, and we want to, I guess, lower the bar or increase access to participation in as many things as we can, I think. So that's a really easy one, testimony meeting, but I think probably other areas where we could potentially consider that is like callings. I struggle with the idea that people need to be perfectly quote unquote worthy to serve in a calling, or that we can't find creative ways at least to enable participation in the activities of the church. There's so many people that sit on the sidelines who want to participate, and sometimes through, in my opinion, bureaucracy of leadership are kept from participating. And so I think whether that's what we kind of talk to as like a worthiness issue, like you can't serve because you did X or Y, Z, so you don't have the Spirit. And I just push back on that a little bit.
Well, I think there's a powerful principle that, because we do want to raise the bar in some contexts. Like we do want them to go on the mission, and there's definitely standards. We do want them to have the temple, marriage, and sealing, and there's certain standards there, right? But in that ward level, like that's the starting point for a lot of people, right? When somebody is investigating the church, they come to church, and like that's the step one of like, okay, I'm here. Like, so by giving them at least something that they can reach for or even trip over, being like, you're doing it, like you have a place here to stand and share your testimony, or we can find a place for you to serve, even though you feel like your life is out of control and full of sin. Like there's lots of sin in this war, but so I think it's a sound leadership principle of like giving them that starting point of saying, yeah, we're not there yet, but you're not expected to be there yet. We'll get there.
Yeah. And I think it's just a mentality of looking for reasons why they can't serve or participate, and just flipping that and looking for ways in which they can, just like really focusing on how can we enable them rather than how can we continue to prevent them or prohibit them. Yeah. I think it was Tom Christofferson that said, and this is not doctrine, but it's just a thought, but that there's a temple standard of worthiness, and then there's a chapel standard of worthiness. And the temple standard is what we know it is, but the chapel standard is if you walk through the door, you're worthy. And so I think we just need to look for ways to enable people to serve, to participate in every way.
Love it. The last question I have for you is, as you reflect on your time as a bishop, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
You know, I think when you're called to serve as a leader, it's, you know, you inevitably stretch. One of my favorite videos online, maybe you can reference this afterward, is this video of this. It's like a concert. It's like a festival. And you've probably seen it, but you know, there's this crazy dude on a hill and he's dancing, and everybody else around him is like, "Dude's a weirdo, man." And then gradually, one by one, another person joins in, and another person joins in, and you know, I guess, being a leader, you're really like, especially as the bishop of a ward, you're kind of the first follower, and you can I guess stand out there by yourself, but you know, as you do it and you do it well, people will come and follow. And so I guess, you know, being a leader or being called to serve as a leader just helped me kind of refine who I am as a person. And without being able to serve in that capacity, I'm sure that I wouldn't have stretched in the ways that I have, both within a church context, but in a personal context as a father, as a husband. There's certainly lessons in there that have helped me kind of leverage my relationships outside of church.